Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
I'm Maul.
And I'm Pops.
And welcome to our next episode for the college football season. I've lost years off my life.
And money out of my bank account.
Oh, my God. Oh, yeah. Well, we can get that much later. Yeah, don't listen to us for betting advice. That's like, if whatever we say, just do the opposite. Probably going to win some money. Although our straight up picks have been pretty good, it's against the spread that we get murdered on. For those of those keeping track of how we're doing each week. The game I was talking about was Bama, Georgia. Probably one of the best games that I've seen in a while in college football. I know that Bama got up, blew the lead. One play later, came immediately back to take it, sealed it with a pick. I'll get into more of that game once we get into the rankings yet again, just to go over. Maul had the question, so I'll bring it down again for the listeners out there. How we're doing it, we're ranking our top 14 teams. So 12 teams that we think are the 12 best in the nation, meaning that the number one team we think would beat everyone down the list. The number two would beat everyone behind them, but not the number one, and so on going down. As this, list develops, I want to throw it to Maul because of something that he said, which is, it's a point of emphasis because the frustrations that he's had, I've had, and I think all fans in college football are going to have here in a few weeks, which is when you were rating them all, what did you say about your ratings?
Yeah, so this is, you talked about it prior to the season even starting. Like, everybody assumed, we're going to 12 teams. This is going to alleviate all these tough conversations. False. Like, it makes it almost harder because there's like more options. So you get through like the first 9. 9 is probably the number for most people. And like there might be some differences between like 3, 4, 5, or even like 7, 8, 9. Like the teams where they're at might be different, but the same teams are there. You get past 9 and you're just like, I hate this. Like I cannot choose out of 10 certain teams. Like it's really difficult. It makes it even more difficult when you're like, again, when you're picking who I think the better team is versus like how I think the committee is going to view this, or how the rankings are going to shake up, when it comes down to them putting people in the playoff, because we all know that those two are not the same. They say they're putting the 12 best teams in, but that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, because they use last week's rankings and last year's rankings and how many championships they've won over the past 12 years. Like they take all that stuff into consideration, which we know they shouldn't, but they do. So again, you get past 9 and it just becomes this miserable mental battle of where you put people.
This is my going in argument to how this argument's going to be made, and we'll see if you guys agree. When it was the top 4, what was it about? It was about wins. Like, what wins mattered?
Florida State would disagree.
Yeah, Florida State would disagree, but there was like one loss. On the back end of this, now when we're talking about the back end of teams, I really think it's going to come down to the losses. Like, yes, the wins are going to matter, but I really think that what you're going to have this breakdown is you're going to have people being like, NIU beat Notre Dame. Why is Notre Dame ranked? And they're going to be like, well, Clemson got boat raced by Georgia. And you're like, yes, but these losses are not the same. Like, I get that there's 1 and 1 in the columns, and that's what I'm really interested to see from the CFP committee, is like, because it'll be interesting to hear our justifications for like why we have teams. These are our first 2 teams out. Here's the bottom tier teams. Because I think that we're doing it right, which is, who do we think would beat who? Like, because ultimately, you look at the schedule, not all of these teams are going to be undefeated. There was a few that could finish the season without ever seeing one another undefeated, really just from each conference is how that's going to work out. But outside of that, like, we're going to be breaking down teams that have losses and how they differentiate that will be chaos, in my opinion.
Let's not also forget, and I don't know what your guys' rankings look like, but do any of you have a Big 12 team in your top 12? I don't.
No.
Because
Exactly,
I was
right?
I was looking at that too. I was just
so
like,
exactly, right? So like, let's not forget, we're gonna give you 12 teams here. None of us have a Big 12 team. One of these top 12 that are making the CFP is going to be a Big 12 team, right? It's going to happen. And probably a team like Boise State or one of those, non-Power 5 type schools that is going to be in there, right? So right off the bat, it's hard enough just trying to say who's the best, but right off the bat, you got to now eliminate 2 more from your list to add in these extras. And like, again, it's just like, how do you do this without absolute mental headache?
That will be such a interest. What you just talked about, like when you look at the Big 12, we'll start at the back end of our list, and I'll give away my number 14 team, which is Iowa State. They're undefeated. But you sit back and you look at the Big 12, I think that this could be a conference that you could have 2 or 3 losses as your champion. Like Pop said it after Oklahoma State got blown out last week. Like, this is what Oklahoma State does. Like, they'll get blown out in a few games. You're like, oh, they're bad. But somehow they like weasel their way in, backdoor it into the Big 12 championship and make it competitive. And you're like, well, what do we do then? And then you're like comparing them against, say, like a 1-loss Boise State or an undefeated UNLV team. And you're like, are we really going to put UNLV at the number 4 seed because they're undefeated? Like, that's the problem the committee has when you say, hey, the top 5 conferences in terms of ranking get an automatic bid in. You're asking for it. You're asking for this type of dilemma that, because let me tell you, I don't care who you are, whoever goes and plays UNLV is like, thank you very much. We'll take this W. Not saying that ULV could pull off the shocker, but the likelihood of that happening, low. So anything else to add on that point before we get into the...
I'd go one step further and say it's even beyond just Oklahoma State. That's just like the Big 12. Like the Big 12 has been like that for the last, I don't know, as long as I can remember. I mean, like think of like the TCU Kansas State debacle when, TCU lost their conference championship and then beat Michigan and then had the worst blowout in a championship we've ever seen against Georgia, right? Like that's just the Big 12. The Big 12 has always been like that.
100%. The nightmare team that I can see coming to win the Big 12, I hate saying this, is like Colorado. Colorado's like, do they have some good players? Yes, but are they like a great football team? No. But I can see the committee, easily putting them in at 4 because it would ratings. You look at all these different things that you talk about the SEC bias. Like if you act like Colorado's not good for the sport in terms of money making, you're wrong. Like there's a reason they're talked about. Why? Because it draws interest in the game. Someone has to be willing to stay up to watch Colorado get blasted by Nebraska. That's what the sport's made of. So yeah, we'll see who weasels their way out of the Big 12 into the playoffs. But from there, first 2 out. So you guys heard my number 14 team, which was Iowa State. Who do you guys have?
Go ahead, Pops.
Yeah, for me, I was in the same boat. I had Iowa State as my Big 12 representative. And then the other one, if we were going to go 14 and 13, would be LSU.
Okay. I've got at 13, I have Mizzou.
Ooh,
sitting
interesting.
At 13.
See, so this is where I will like slightly disagree with you, Dutch. My number 14 is Notre Dame.
Okay.
And here's where I say this is where it's difficult, because do those losses matter? Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, so in a ranking system, yes, losing to NIU is like inexcusable. However, when you're ranking who's the better team, like, I think that was 100% a fluke. I don't think anybody truly believes that Notre Dame is that bad of a team. So that's why when you're ranking these teams as far as like who's the better team, I'm looking at like Iowa State and BYU and putting them up against Notre Dame. And I'm saying more than half the time, I think Notre Dame wins that game. Like, I get it. They lost to NIU and they shouldn't be ranked that high. But if you're just going to compare the two teams that way, and let's say who's better, I give it to Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is my 14, and then USC is my 13. Because again, I know they have the one loss to Michigan, but and they're not looking great in the trenches. But again, if you're going to compare USC versus BYU, I think USC is a better football team.
Notre Dame, for me, this is just, I don't know who Notre Dame is.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that it's going to be very difficult to determine that until later in the season when they play USC. They haven't played, I get that they played Louisville. Don't get me wrong, Louisville's undefeated and ranked. ACC is trash. We know that. The ACC is bad. Miami dropped far in my rankings because for 2 weeks now, Miami's not looked good. Now, they didn't look good in the first half against South Florida and came back and beat them. But Virginia Tech, same team that lost to Vanderbilt, the same team that the quarterback threw a backwards pass out of the end zone, just yeeted that ball for a safety, in my opinion, should have won the game just because I didn't see any clear, the ruling on the field was a touchdown and all the evidence they said. It wasn't until after the game that there was a picture out of the ball clearly not being possessed by anyone and everyone's laying there, guys out of bounds. I was like, okay, I see that. But during the game, there wasn't any clear shot that I was incomplete pass. I was sitting there going, Virginia Tech just won this football game. There went Miami.
Oh, yeah. Everyone thought that the ref was underneath the hood looking at the play, and he's underneath there on a phone call to the dudes in Charlotte going, we can't let Miami fall out of the top 10, can we? No, man, they bring in much better ratings. You got to call it incomplete.
In that conspiracy theory is not wrong. I can't sit back and be like, if you think that someone in the higher headquarters didn't have a bias of being we really can't let Miami take a loss now, against Virginia Tech. It's going to be so hard to overcome that. It should have never been called a touchdown on the field.
Thank you.
And that's the issue, is that it was messed up by the refs from the get-go, and it should have been called incomplete. And if you want to review it and change it to a touchdown, by all means. But the fact that there were questions, just go with the incomplete pass. You made it more difficult on the conference from having to be no, this is bad. You shouldn't call this in the first place. So I get that. But my thing with Notre Dame is, to go back to that, I haven't seen them play anybody. Now I can sit back, and the reason Iowa State's where they're at is just because I don't know who Iowa State is. I know Iowa has a good defense most years, but I know Iowa's offense is trash, and Iowa State got lucky and won the game on a last-second field goal. Mizzou. Is Vanderbilt better this year than they have been in years in the past? Yes.
Yes.
They took them to overtime, and if it wasn't for Vandy's kicker just out there Ray Finkling it, then who knows what happens in the second OT. Mizzou has shown that, hey, we're not the Mizzou that you guys saw last year. They have clearly lost a step from that. So
this is why I say it's so difficult, because if we're gonna talk about that the outcome of games matter or don't matter, you're almost forcing teams to you got to have a flawless season. You can't have many mistakes. But we've already talked about with 12 teams, there's going to be some 1, 2, 3 loss teams that are probably making the playoffs. So it's am I giving them a pass? No. But at the same time, if we're just ranking who I think the better team is, yeah, teams have bad games. It happens. Everybody slips up now and again. That doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, change who that team is.
I get that. I understand where you're coming from. Who is your guys' number 12 team?
I got Michigan at 12.
Michigan at 12 for Maul and Pops?
Simply for the fact that, they're close, right? They're right there on the bubble, primarily because, if they can't throw the ball, they're in trouble, right? I think this one is going to be one of those that works itself out. So as it stands right now, they're still winning football games, but if they don't learn how to throw the ball quickly, they're going to find themselves falling out of the rankings, probably just naturally. But as it stands right now, they're the fact that they're not able to throw the ball but still winning football games is, I think, it's a decent testament to the team.
Yeah, and for me, this where I threw in Notre Dame. Just trying to give them a little bit of props, because we know if they continue playing this way, they're going to end up being there anyways. So I'm just trying to make this a little bit more realistic. For the expectations of how soon they're going to get blown out of the 12-team playoff. So yeah, I've got them sitting at number 12 right now.
Notre Dame, in all honesty, for me, was that I have it scratched through on my sheet of paper. It was between them and Iowa State at 14.
It's tough. It's tough because it depends on which Riley Leonard is going to show up to the game. They have a fantastic defense, but they don't have a quarterback. Look at Sam Hartman last year, supposed to win the Heisman. Terrible.
And that's why 12 for me this is where I threw LSU. Is LSU, did they have a loss to USC week 1, and USC's defense played really well? I'd sit back and I would argue that LSU's quarterback didn't look great, and they had a close game against South Carolina. Now they've handled their business against 2 bad teams, Nicholls State and South Alabama, and steamrolled them, but they haven't played someone again that is good, and that's what I'm interested to see. I have a hard time saying that Mizzou would beat LSU, and I have a hard time saying that Iowa State would beat LSU. And that's sort of where I'm at with Notre Dame. Like, if you put LSU and Notre Dame, on a neutral site, who do I think's winning? Like, I don't trust Riley Leonard more than I do LSU's quarterback. Like that, and now it's close. It's not like a clear. That's where I'm like sitting, and that's why I have such a hard problem with it. But LSU's number 12 for me this week. They're off. They're on a bye. We're not gonna. LSU's next big game is
next week.
Is that Ole Miss?
Yeah, Ole Miss.
Yeah. So Ole Miss going there at night. Now it lost a lot because Kentucky showed up again for the second straight week, and this time they ended up dethroning Ole Miss, which is funny because Ole Miss didn't even make my top 14 teams.
Woof.
It's a bad loss.
This is where I struggled as well. Good transition, because I got Ole Miss at 11. But again, when I'm originally writing it out, my first instinct was like, Ole Miss is out, dude. They lost to Kentucky. You're out. But this is, again, where I'm trying to use the logic of like
the fluke game.
You line that game up 10 times. Ole Miss wins 9.5 of them. It's just, it's just the way it rolls out sometimes. That's football. I still have Ole Miss in there because I think, from like an actual football talent standpoint, they are still better than some of these teams. Now,
100%.
We've talked about it. Like, some of these rankings are going to work themselves out naturally just by finishing the rest of the season. But as it stands right now, I got Ole Miss at 11.
I've got USC at 11.
Same.
This is, I couldn't put USC below LSU because they've had the win against them. And at the same time, I also we were talking on the phone because I knew I waited for, this is always the interesting one. Because I knew that someone was watching the Bama-Georgia game when it was coming back, and I was like, I think Maul's asleep. I was like, but the fact that I know Pops is watching this, I was like, the fact that he hasn't texted is he's like, I don't want to poke the bear. Like, I'm going to let this be. And so I hadn't said anything to Maul. Well, Maul calls me, and Maul's like, I'm about ready to throw my remote through the TV. Like, he's furious. And I was like, okay, we can talk this game. Like, because I hate being that guy that like calls when your team's down. And it's like, I'm not calling to rub it in. I'm here for moral support. Like, we're not playing one another, so I'm in this with you. USC's offensive, their left tackle is terrible. Like, and the defensive line was really getting handled. And Maul said something that if you want to say it again, I'll let you say it, in terms of just your fear of going in a Big Ten play, in just terms of how they were handled.
It's like classic Big Ten play. Everybody kind of knows it's like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. We got the big hog mollies up front. That's what the Big Ten's kind of known for. We talked about it a lot with Oregon, of like they've never matched up well against that. So that's why we're a little nervous or anxious about them really making it too far. But I mean, USC's not immune to it either. You know, we've played Pac-12 ball for the longest time, so now all of a sudden we're meeting these big corn-fed dudes in the Midwest, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is a different type of game. You know, we have to adjust the way that we start recruiting going forward, because it's going to be difficult to survive in this type of environment, simply for the fact that, like, they're just bigger and stronger than you.
So USC plays Minnesota this week. They're -8. For me, USC, the way USC wins games is they have to get up early. Like, if you allow the other team, a Big Ten team, to get up, what are they going to do? They're going to run the football. And it's like that is how you attack USC. Is you can't be fighting to erase a 14-point deficit against USC. Why? Because that suits USC. We'll spread you out. We'll throw it around. We'll, a little screen route here, other things like that fits Lincoln Riley's offense. What doesn't fit it is where now the defense is like, hey, Minnesota's up by 10 in the second half, and they're just running the football and milking it. And if, Miller Moss isn't consistent and he's out of tune, it's like you can go 3 and out like that. And then now you're 5 minutes later before you're getting the ball back because they're just draining the clock on the other side. So USC, in order to win these Big Ten games, in my opinion, it requires them to not come out of the gate slow. You have to have a fast start if you're USC in order to compete against teams that just honestly love to run the football. Pops, who you got at 11?
My number 11 is USC as well.
Yeah, there we go. Number 10. Where you guys at?
This is where I put Mizzou.
Okay.
See,
this is my shocker of the rankings. I had them unranked, and Dutch's argument last week convinced me. I brought Clemson all the way up to 10. And I was trying to battle my own argument where they got boat raced by Georgia at the beginning of the season, but have looked really good, good ever since. And again, the way they're playing defense right now, I read a stat, I think, to Dutch. It was Clemson's first 14 drives of the season or something like that. And it started out with punt, turnover on downs, punt, fumble, interception, punt, or something like that. And then the next 12 straight drives were all touchdowns. So it's did they just have a bad week one, looked bad against a really, really good Georgia team? They had week one jitters, blah, 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 all that stuff. And now we're really seeing what Clemson's about. So that's where I brought them all the way up to 10, just because, again, the way that they're playing defense and absolutely handling their business, it's tough for me to say that a lot of teams are going to win that game multiple times over Clemson.
Have any of y'all ever seen a murder? No, because you're going to watch one this weekend. It's Clemson plays Florida State. Dude, they are going to absolutely beat the absolute brakes off them. It is going to be I've never watched a murder live, but if you want to tune in at noon on ABC, that's what you're going to see. Florida State got killed by SMU.
Yeah, SMU.
Florida State's one play away against Cal from not having a win this season. And I look at the rest of Florida State's schedule and I'm like, y'all need to buckle up, because Mike Norvell, I asked my dad that. I was like, what happens if they end 1-9? Does he keep his job? I don't see how if you're name any of the big program, whether it's Clemson, Notre Dame, Bama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, even with a new coach at Michigan, do you really think that if they went 1-9 this year that they're going to keep him on as a head coach? I don't know any other big program that they would keep their head coach if you went 1-9 the next season.
Have any of those teams either gone undefeated and followed it up with this atrocity? That's so unlikely in my, it's so random right now. I feel so bad for Florida State fans.
It legitimately, it will be a trivia question. I know that they've already hit one, which is they were the first top 10 team in history in the AP poll that started the season in the top 10 and lost their first 3 games. And when you look at who they played, Georgia Tech, Boston College and Memphis, like we're not talking. They didn't start off the season like at Georgia versus Bama against Clemson. Like that's forgivable. That was not it. Like Clemson's going to murder them. Like Clemson put up what, like 76 points against the Citadel. Like this is Florida State, and Florida State has looked terrible. It's DJU going back to Clemson. Like this has all the makings of premeditated murder.
Can I just say, I think it was last year when Florida State was undefeated and went and played Clemson, who Clemson wasn't very good last year.
And barely lost.
Barely squeaked
Well, barely
by.
won, excuse me. Yeah, barely won.
Yeah, wouldn't it be something for like Florida State to upset Clemson? Like, wouldn't that just be, I mean, like
That's
how
the
this
chaos
football
of football.
season has been going? Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're saying is take Florida State with the points.
Put a 50 spot on it and just hope to hit the lottery, I guess.
For me, number 10, this is where I put Michigan. I had them one step above USC. You know, last week I had it reversed. I still had USC above them, even though they had just lost. The problem for me was this was back-to-back weeks where I was like, oh, now the USC defense, has it gotten better? Yes. Was it the level of effectiveness that I thought it was against LSU? No. Like, they've had regression since that game, especially in just tackling. Like, man. And then on offense, I forget what you'll know him because I don't know all the players' names off of USC. Number 8, he will make these like circus
Kobe
catches
Lane.
for toe drags on the sideline, but then he'll be wide open in the middle of the field on a curl route and just drop it. Like
he's Odell when it comes to fantastic plays, but he's Kadarius Toney when it comes to routine plays.
Like that's it. Like it drives you insane. Michigan, I agree with you. I think this is a team that, for me, it's like they're ranked here because they keep winning. I doubt this trend continues, just because until you have a quarterback that can throw, like the schedule doesn't get any easier for them. Like they still have some hard games, against Ohio State. They are an underdog this week, so they play Washington, and Washington right now is a 3-point favorite over Michigan this weekend, which I find surprising because no one's really talked about Washington, but Vegas has got them as the favorite right now. I've yet to send you guys the pick'ems, but of the two teams that are ranked right now, the two underdogs right now is Mizzou is a 2-point underdog to A&M, and Michigan is a 3-point underdog to Washington this weekend. So It may be this weekend that we are able to push Michigan out of the rankings. But like you said, if they keep winning, it's going to be tough to not have. Who's their only loss to? Texas. It's difficult to argue when we start talking about losses, whose is better and whose is worse. That's why Michigan's there for me.
It comes down to like a case of like, I don't necessarily believe it, but I have to be proven otherwise until I make the change.
For me, I mean, it goes back to they're a run-only offense. Like they're not throwing the ball. I just looked it up. The most that they've actually thrown this season was 200 yards against Texas. All the other games have been in the 100s. They've had 2 games under 100 in the passing game. And I get it. When you can run the ball, why do you need to do anything else? Michigan's been known for running since Harbaugh, came back and reinvented or gave them a new identity. I don't have them up there. As far as the Mizzou as well, I was going to add when I made that pick for them being my number 10 is this week will be a big test. I think obviously for Michigan being an underdog as well as Mizzou, it's like this is the first challenge that they have all season, against a ranked opponent. And we're going to see, if they're really, pretenders or not. And obviously the same goes for Michigan against Washington. I mean, Minnesota's not that great, and they still, they barely squeak. No, I'm saying, okay. But last week for Michigan playing Minnesota, they barely beat them, by a field goal. So I think Michigan's still a very beatable team. The problem is that they've got size and they can run the ball.
They do a good job of controlling the trenches.
Yeah, exactly.
Their strengths are in the trenches. Their weaknesses are at the skill positions. That's why every game's close, because they just can't score.
Yeah.
Number 9 for me, this is where I threw Clemson. What reminds me, and I'm sure you guys will agree, this is identical to me to Oregon a few years ago when they got boat raced by Georgia to start the season off, and it was like everyone immediately sort of threw them in the
And wrote 'em
dumpster and
off.
said
Yeah.
wrote them off, but they kept winning. And you look at Clemson, who they play Florida State, but they don't play anyone else in the ACC. The only time that they will see Miami is in the ACC championship. That's it. Like, Clemson should win out. And if Clemson wins out and they are sitting there at the end of the season, and especially now if they beat Miami, they're in ACC champion. Clemson's hard to argue with. Like, did they have a really bad week one loss? Absolutely. But like Maul talked about, they have been boat racing teams ever since. We'll see what they do against Florida State this weekend. If they lose, that would be the most typical thing after I said it's going to be premeditated murder. And it's like, no, reverse. You didn't see it coming. Who you guys got at number 9?
This is where I hate the way that the AP does the rankings, though, because like it just same thing with like the CFP, and we talked about last year. Like they have these rules about like what matters, what doesn't, but then they like don't follow them. Like, because if you're comparing the two teams, Clemson versus Ole Miss, Clemson's 3-1, Ole Miss is 4-1, right? So they've got wins over like whatever, not great teams. But who's their loss to? Clemson's losses to Georgia. Who's Ole Miss's loss to? Kentucky. If you're comparing those two eye to eye, who are you ranking higher? It's got to be Clemson, right? Like that's the only logical outcome to that. But Ole Miss
is 12,
and Clemson's 14, right? Like the
15.
Yeah, 15. It doesn't make sense, and I don't like the way that they do that. And primarily, it's because why? And this is like my hill that I'm going to die on, and I'm going to keep beating this dead horse. Why is it that way? Why is right now Ole Miss ranked higher than Clemson? Because at the preseason poll, Clemson was ranked lower, lost first, immediately got pushed way back. Ole Miss was higher, so now therefore they are able to slide them back slower after these losses. Like we live and die by this preseason poll that we've proven over and over again has zero merit and shouldn't have any outcome on the season, but yet continues in little things like this to kind of pre-forecast what the season's going to look like. And I can't stand it. That being said, I have Missouri.
You guys are higher on Missouri. Is it just because they're undefeated? Like,
I mean, kind of. Like, and again, this is one of those, like, do I truly believe it? No, not really. But until you prove otherwise, like, I mean, how they have shown that they can be a good football team. They do this every year where they come out and they surprise people with how good they're playing. Now, they have bad games, probably more than other teams do typically. But until they lose, I mean, they're still winning games. I know losing or getting close to Vandy is tough, but I mean, Vandy beat Virginia Tech and Virginia Tech just almost beat Miami, right? Like we already know like the transitive property doesn't work in football. So
you're not wrong. Well, who you got?
I mean, I'd say mark the tapes because, this week we're going to see Mizzou go down to Kyle Field and see if A&M
they're going to lose.
All right, yeah. There it is.
Texas A&M's going to win that game. Like, watch. Texas A&M has a good defense. And ever since that true freshman came in at quarterback, like, is he going to make – how Texas A&M will lose the game is the true freshman makes mistakes at quarterback. But he's way more dynamic than Wegman. Wegman looked terrible against LSU. Like, we knew that – or against Notre Dame. Like, whoever it was Notre Dame week 1. Like, A&M's gotten a lot better since A&M's gotten a lot better since week 1. This is where A&M beats Mizzou. Like, calling it now. Mizzou's not making it through Kyle Field.
Yeah, and if you're right, like, again, I have no problem. Like, I won't have any heartburn dropping Mizzou out of the top 12 if that happens. Just, again, as of right now, I mean, until I'm proven otherwise, like, I think they're there.
Iowa State's undefeated. You don't have them. That's what. And this is like, it's not picking on you. This is just where.
This is where it's difficult. Yeah,
it's so difficult, and I hate the committee because, like you said, it's like we're going off the basis of like who we think the better teams are, and we have different opinions. It's like committee, you have 13 people that are like, no, we're not subjective. We use these rules. And then they'll put out a ranking. You're like, what do you mean that you put them there? Like,
I mean, Army and Navy are undefeated too, but like, we're not talking about that. It's just
because it ain't 1943.
Yeah, there's a cutoff somewhere, right? Like there's a cutoff. There's a line in the sand somewhere where you kind of decide, I think that team is better than the other team.
100%. Pop, so you got it 9.
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss. Ole Miss finally enters the chat.
Yeah. I think they still have the prolific offense. Obviously, they got caught with a bad game against Kentucky. They had the opportunity to win, and they just couldn't do it. Yet again, it was just one of those down weeks, and I don't think they have that problem again. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, it'll be a different conversation if they lose again.
I got to catch the tail end of this game. I don't know why college teams do this so much. It drives me. And I find that in the pros, they do not do it this way. The pros, when you are losing by 3, what are they trying to do? They're trying to win the game. Like they get into field goal position quickly, but they're trying to score. College is not that way. College, it's like the second we get in field goal range, it's almost like they take their foot off the gas. And it's like, no. Now we just don't want a mistake that costs us a field goal. And I'm like, there's a reason that there's like one college kicker taken before the 4th round, because they are sketchy as all get out.
Georgia wouldn't have had their second national championship if this wasn't the case with Ohio State, because that's exactly what happened. Ohio State got in a field goal, and it wasn't like guaranteed field goal range, but it was close enough, and their play calling changed drastically, and they weren't able to gain another yard and then miss the field goal. And if they would have just ran a normal offense, they were going to win that game guaranteed.
And that's what I saw against Ole Miss versus Kentucky. It was like they were taking deeper shots. They stretched the defense vertically, and they immediately changed it up. Like the second that tight end caught that pass and they got in the field goal range, it was just Ole Miss's offense changed. It was like, no, we're playing for overtime now. And it's like, no, you have time. Go win the game. And if not, at least get your kicker even closer. Because the second that they lined up, it was like, it's like, I know that me and you have talked about this. I remember in college looking down at the practice field of the kickers, and it was like they weren't lining up, kicking field goals. No, they were like spinning the ball, trying to kick it off their heel to see if they could make it. Like, what are you guys doing down there? Like, these guys don't even practice. Like,
flipping water bottles around and stuff.
Yeah, they're out there like LARPing with swords and stuff. And you just sit back and you're like, this is why they miss. Like, you can't kick for 4 straight hours. Like, I'd argue that's why most of these kickers get into these, and it's hard. Like, you can't, coaches try to do it. They'll be like, hey, if the guy makes it, we'll end practice now. And they try to put this like pressure on them. But it's like, you know what the best pressure is? These games. And most of the time, just like you said, Ohio State, Ole Miss, I can even go Alabama to win it against Georgia. If back before Tua threw that touchdown, he shanked it. It's like, dude, I don't trust the college kicker. Get into position to win the game and win it via the touchdown. That's your best chance. Don't rely on the kicker.
We talked about this. USC or Michigan's kicker, by missing that extra point, actually won them the game, which is like ironic, because if Michigan made that extra point, they'd have only been down by 3. And when they got in field goal range on 4th down, they would have just kicked the field goal and took it to overtime. But because they were down by 4, they went for it, converted, and ended up winning the game because of it.
Yep. Sometimes the kicker missing wins you the game. Number 8.
And now he's missing kicks for the 49ers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 8. This is where I threw Miami.
I have Miami as 8 as well.
Ooh. Pops, did you follow suit?
Yes.
Look at that. All of us agree at number 8, Miami. I'll let you explain Cam Ward. You said something last week that when I was talking about his comfortability in the pocket, that I got the laughing at, and I was like, it's pretty true.
I was just being cheeky, but he was so cool, calm, and collected that entire game. It was like you couldn't tell whether or not he's just that cool dude. And like, of course, the announcer just like, oh yeah, he's so cool, he's not phased at all. But it was almost to the point where it was just like, does he even know the gravity of this situation right now? Like, and it gets this not to like knock at him, and I don't want to catch any hate for it, but it was just like he almost seemed too lax, where it was like they were about to lose, and like he didn't seem flustered at all, which again is like that's what you would think you'd want, but it was just like the vibe I was getting was like he maybe didn't even understand the fact that they were going to lose to Virginia Tech there.
I mean, it also helps that he's been playing for 6 years.
Yeah, that my big thing with Miami was like, and this is this is where it's tough. This is the exact Virginia Tech team we thought was going to show up all season, right? Like they were talking about Virginia Tech being like sneaky ACC champions and all this different stuff. It just so happens that they come out and lose to Vanderbilt, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you just write them off. But like when they do finally show up, all of a sudden we're like surprised. And it's like, well, no, like that's the team we thought was going to show up all year. I think this is just the first time that they did show up, and it just so happened that Miami kind of got caught maybe looking ahead or, you know, just thinking that they were a pushover. And, you know, we already talked about the debacle at the end of the game, but Miami barely survived that one.
Well, and it was like I texted you guys. I mean, their quarterback was I now taking it back. Didn't look like Mike Vick, but I'd give him Marcus. He was looking like Marcus, you know, in a VT uniform a little bit, you know, a little bit of glimpses, making some plays.
Miami's still, I mean, like I said, they don't play Clemson. They play Florida State. They'll have to play Louisville. They control their fate. And this is probably looking ahead to Louisville. It was a good. Luckily they escaped with the win, but we'll see how they look against Louisville up next.
Sorry,
number 7,
California, then Louisville.
Cal, then Louisville. Number 7, who do you guys got?
I got Oregon here. I don't like the pick. Like they're still undefeated, and it's like, is it going to come together for this team? You know, I just don't know, and I don't like the pick, but I've got Oregon there.
Got the same.
I've got the same. See, and like this is where, again, a lot of this stuff is going to naturally work itself out. I feel like most of our rankings from here on out are going to be very, very similar. I'm with you, Pops. I don't love it. I think Oregon has really been on the benefit end of having a weak schedule early, because if they've gotten better every game, but they're still not playing to the level that we expected of them. They've gotten lucky that their schedule has been pretty weak early on, and they've gotten away with it. If they had the reverse of their schedule, meaning all the hard stuff up front and the easy stuff at the back, they probably wouldn't be ranked at this point because they haven't been playing well and they'd have some losses. I think they're going to get better. They keep progressing and showing development, so they're probably going to start hitting their stride right as they get into those tough games, and it's going to be like, oh, why did we ever doubt them? But again, this is just they're at the benefit end of the way the schedule was constructed.
And I think the biggest saving grace that they have, and we talked about it off camera before we started the show, was next weekend, October 12th, is going to be probably the best day of college football this whole entire season. And the saving grace for them is that Ohio State goes to them versus them having to go play in the Horseshoe, because I don't think that they would survive. Based on what we've seen so far, I don't see them surviving that game. But the fact of them playing in Eugene gives them a little bit of help.
Oregon this week, it's really their first. I know that they have a 1 in the win column in Big 12 play because they played UCLA. This is their first actual Big Ten game this weekend. They're minus 24 against Michigan State. It gives me a lot of the USC Wisconsin vibes of Michigan State. Don't get me wrong, terrible Big Ten team. They are historically bad from what they've been, but it's one of these, like, this is your rat poison game. Michigan State got absolutely throttled by Ohio State last week. A lot of people are going to compare, you know, how do you play against Michigan State to how Ohio State played. It's a trap game for Oregon. Ohio State plays Iowa, which yet again, it's a nut. Ohio State right now is a 20.5-point favorite over Iowa. Both teams are going to try to get not caught looking ahead to October 12th. But like you said, October 12th is after that week of football. There's going to be a lot of our rankings are going to have some major changes just because we're going to find out who teams truly are because it's the first time they actually play one another. Which I want to go out on a limb, and I want to say that everyone at number 6 has Penn State. Okay, I got it right with Pops.
Yeah.
Maul, who do you got?
I got Penn State.
Now for Penn State, they play this weekend. They got UCLA. They're 27.5-point favorites. But next week, yet again, October 12th, it's this huge day. That's when Penn State plays USC. So it will give us a lot more. For me, this is like James Franklin's big test. You don't have to play Michigan and Ohio State this year. You just have to play Michigan. You don't have to play Ohio State. Can you beat 2 bigger opponents? Can you not suck against USC? Like, that's the question. Like,
Penn State is always like the fool me once, shame on me. You ain't gonna fool me again. Like, this is this now. I'm not even a Penn State fan. I feel like Penn State fans probably have more passion behind this, but like, this is Penn State. This is the best Penn State's looked, I feel like, in a long time. They look good. But again, like, I've probably said that before, right? Or at least Penn State fans have, right? They probably talked about how good they've always looked. So we'll see with them. I could even see them beating Ohio State at this point. But, I mean, history...
I think the phrase, I'm ready to get hurt again, was invented at Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, goodness.
We'll see. It's just, they should throttle UCLA. UCLA is not a good football team, which I feel bad because the head coach is Eric Bellamy, and that looks...
No, he's the OC.
Oh, he's the OC? I thought he was head coach.
No, remember it was that other dude that froze in the press conference. Oh yeah,
that's right.
Welcome.
My gosh!
You see this behind me? Like, nobody told him, man, he was going to have to go out there and give a presser.
We're from Los Angeles.
Yeah, with USC.
Questions? Yeah, they're lost.
I think the thing for me that I like about this year's Penn State team that's always been the issue, well, outside of when they had Saquon, but they seem to have an offense. I mean, they're averaging 400 yards a game. Yeah. Yes, they have a quarterback. That's
you
not
didn't like Trace McSorley.
Yeah, McSorley.
You didn't like Hackleberg.
So, I mean, the good news is like they're averaging 400 yards per game, and I mean they had a decent enough tune-up against Illinois, and were able to stop them on defense and still put up 20 points. So. It should be pretty interesting to see. I still think that they'll have a challenge, and it's really about obviously next weekend with USC and then follow on 2 weeks later with Ohio State to see if this is the final year that they can get over that hump and maybe help get Ryan Day fired.
Speaking of that, I'm going to guess that everybody has Ohio State at number 5.
Yeah, baby.
There we go. The reason that and I'm sure y'all's rankings sort of look like this as well. When I got to Oregon, it was like, well, of the Big Ten teams, I don't think they're better than Penn State, and I don't think Penn State's better than Ohio State because Penn State can't beat them, and that's what like developed that list of 3. But that will play out during the year, like those 3 teams, and it's one of those ones where I want to be very clear with what I'm about to say. It's the next 4 teams that we talk about. And then it's a drop, in my opinion. The AP poll has Ohio State at number 3 right now, in front of Tennessee and Georgia. And I'm telling you right now, if Tennessee or Georgia went and played them tomorrow, both of the Tennessee's whooping them, and Georgia's gonna murder them. Like, I'll get to Georgia here in a second. Talking about if you want to bet on a game, this is the one that I would probably leverage the house on. But Ohio State to me is always overrated. Like, does the Jeremiah Smith kid look really good for them at wide receiver? Yes, but Ohio State has not played anyone, and they will not play anyone outside of Big Ten play.
Yeah,
they only play Big Ten teams.
Well, and that was going to be my next point. Sorry, Maul, before you go, I was going to interject. Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, Michigan State. Like, that's all you've played so far, and yeah, you're boat racing them, but like, what? I mean, where's the competition?
They don't have it.
Listen, this is just, I guess, my personality because I like to just throw in the like what ifs to watch the world burn. Wouldn't it be something if Penn State finally beats Ohio State this year? Because they really do look like they could beat them, but then end up losing to like USC and Wisconsin, or like USC and Maryland or something like that, and then Ohio State jumps them back up in the Big Ten's rankings. Like, tell me, like, that's not a 100% likely scenario. Like, it just seems like that would be something that happened to Penn State this year and would somehow keep Ohio State like relative in this conversation. And then to pile on with Ohio State, the fact that they're still getting first place votes is just an absolute joke from the AP poll. Like, I'm not saying that you need to rank them outside the top 25, but can we stop giving them first place votes? What have you seen this year outside of your boomerism that is they're worthy of a first place vote? I mean, again, we all have them 5 based on watching actual football games. And there's somebody who's ranking them 1? Really? Like, who is that guy? Give me his address. I'm gonna go fight him.
True, but this is that bias that like gets into. We talked about it, I think, at the beginning of the year. I brought up the thing of teams in the last 20 years that have won 3 national championships, and you said USC's done it, LSU's done it, Alabama's done it, and then whose teams that we always hear about? Ohio State and Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't done it. Like, Miami's done it in the past 20 years before Ohio State's done it. Like, that's to me where I sit back and I'm like, guys, like, we keep, this is big time, like, pet peeve. I wish that we would do away with the AP poll in terms of, if you haven't won a championship since the BCS time, none of it counts. I don't want to hear about a championship that was decided in 1936 because of the bias. If you got Ohio State ranked number 1 right now, you're going to sit back and tell me in 1936 it wasn't even more, like, they didn't even have TVs. Like, you didn't even have to watch all the games. Like,
Nope.
I know it's biased. Like, get rid of it. Like, I get that you have to have some type of, you need to develop a computer model that ranks teams based upon, like, hey, they have this many returning starters, they have this type of offensive production, coaching changes. You can if Vegas can come up with spreads that almost like nail it on the head every single week, then you can come up with a computer system that ranks teams outside of having some sports writer tell me Ohio State's still the number 1 team in the country.
You also don't, I mean, you think like, if they weren't ranked as high as they were preseason, they'd still have this ranking. You know, like, this is another thing of like, if they weren't ranked, if we went into this with like a clean slate and nobody had any number beside them before they played any games, I don't think Ohio State's this high. Like, again, we kind of know the potential there, but they haven't played anybody. And that being said, they haven't even really looked super great playing nobody. So like, the fact that they're even number 3 is sad, but then the fact that they're getting number 1 votes is just like, what game are you watching?
Yes. And I get if you want to ding Georgia for having a loss. Like, I can sort of understand that with like, well, Ohio State's undefeated, that's why they're at 3. Tennessee had to go play Oklahoma. And I'm not saying Oklahoma's a great team or anything, but they still had to go on the road and do that. Ohio State hasn't played anyone. They haven't beaten a ranked team. Like, Oklahoma's ranked. Like, that to me is the bigger injustice. Is like, Tennessee at a minimum in the AP poll should be ranked above Ohio State because
100%.
they've played someone. Like, and like you said, the even more travesty is like the fact that no one on ESPN's like, who are the people voting Ohio State as the number 1 team in the nation right now? Like, you're mad. They have not played. You're giving them credit for games they have not even played yet. Like,
and again, this is the like, they have these rules of like, they've got Bama number 1. They jumped Texas, which, again, it's not that I have a problem with that, but it's like, why did Bama jump Texas? Oh, because they've got this bigger win over Georgia. That's like a big win for them. Okay, well then apply that logic to Ohio State and Tennessee.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how is that logic not just get applied 2 teams down and say, I get it. Like, neither one of them have a loss, but like, what's the win? Like, how do you say that they don't apply the logic equally among the teams? And that's the infuriating part.
Well, and even to add, more evidence to your argument, Maul, just going back, Boise State started the season not even being in the top 25. Obviously, they lost to Oregon, but they played a fantastic game there. But they played nobody for the rest of the season, and now they're number 21. So you're telling me, if we had no rankings at the beginning of the season, Ohio State would be in that same exact boat. They'd be in the low the 20s, working their way up the ladder. But because of who they are and who they've always been, they're at the top. It just doesn't make any sense.
Number 4. Who do you have? I've got Georgia at 4.
I have Tennessee at 4.
Ooh. So I'll let you go. Why? Why have Tennessee below?
This one was close. I went back and forth with it. And it'll kind of explain my number 1 and number 2 as well. I'm high on Tennessee. Don't get me wrong. I think they're great. I think they look great. I think they absolutely have a shot at beating Georgia this year. Again, this is just the way Georgia looked like in the first half versus their ability to come back is kind of what is going to set my rankings going forward here. Same thing with Bama. I mean, like, everybody was ready to give Jalen Milroe the Heisman at halftime, right? It was just like, put him in New York like it's over. And then all of a sudden, there's this regression of like, okay, and I said this live during the game while we were talking. I said, I don't think Georgia's this bad. I also don't think Bama is this good. Like, and that's kind of what it goes to. It's just like, did Georgia have a really bad game? Yeah. Did they look beatable like we've kind of said all year? Obviously, they lost. But like that second half, I think showed the true identity of both teams, like Bama and Georgia, right? So like Georgia is still a really good football team. Tennessee's going to have to show up and play their absolute best game to beat Georgia. I don't think Georgia has to show up and play their best game to beat Tennessee, and that's the difference for me. It's close. I wrote in Tennessee as 3 and Georgia as 4, and then I drew a little arrow to swap them because it's close. Tennessee was my first initial reaction, but then when I thought through it that way, yeah, I get it. Georgia played awful that first half, and if you say, hey, you got to take the average of the 2 halves, yeah, they're a worse team than Tennessee. But like I said during the game, I thought truly, if we would have had an entire game of that second half, oh my God, that would have been like one of the best games in history, right? Because it just, neither team showed who they truly were the first half. Both teams showed who they truly were the second half.
The team that I would hate to be right now is Auburn, because Auburn has to go to Georgia. Georgia's minus 24, and this is the game that I'm like, if you want to bet the house on, it's Georgia to cover. Like, what's killed Auburn all year? Turnovers. Georgia is going to try to make a statement. They're because the worst case scenario is that Auburn keeps it close. They can't let Auburn hang around because I don't care. Auburn's not a good football team, but if you let a bad football team hang around, you give them hope. Just like Georgia, like last week. I said it to you, and I said it to my dad at halftime. I literally have the text message. My dad was like, what do you think at half? And I go, we have got to put the foot on their throat. Like, you have to kill the team. Now, I'll go into this when I get to Bama in terms of why I'm sort of glad the game worked out like it did. For Georgia, there's a lot of hope. Just like you said. Was Georgia as bad as they were in the first half? No. Georgia's biggest issue, and I will give a little bit of like give and take to this. Georgia got fortunate that Bama played the way they did in the second half. They literally were doing all-out blitz with just single man on the outside, and it worked out for Georgia. That literally just throw it up, and more times than not, the wide receiver is going to come down with it, and that's what happened. I think against a different defensive scheme, Georgia wouldn't have made the game as close as they did towards the end. Like, I would have rather seen Bama play a defense that said, hey, if you want to come back, it's going to take you 12 plays to get down the field rather than 1. And I don't know, it's a great learning for Bama. Georgia, in my opinion, was fortunate to get the game back to where they got it, because I think against a different team with a defensive scheme, Georgia doesn't make it as close as they do. Georgia's still a good team. Like you said, but Georgia dude, it's not just Tennessee. Georgia has, this is the worst thing that could have happened to Georgia, because they still have to go to Texas. They still have to play Tennessee at home. And I know that it took a hit, but they still have to go to Ole Miss. Like, they still have tough games.
Well,
Like,
so to add on to your point, the way that it happened benefits Georgia. Obviously, losing isn't a benefit. However, if they just came out and it was 56-0, even at the second half, if it just the first half played out the same way as the second half, dude, Tennessee's going into that game against Georgia mega confident. Like, we can absolutely beat these dudes. Ole Miss is going into that game mega confident. Like, we can beat these dudes. And you can't tell me that that's not a big factor when it comes to college ball. But the fact that Georgia was able to come back and show everybody, like, hey, this is why, we've been so good lately. Like, now that puts that little bit of doubt in Tennessee and Ole Miss's mind, where they're like, they're not that easy of a pushover. We still have to show up, right? Like, Bama has had that benefit, and you probably know this more than anybody. Like, Bama's won games prior to the game even starting, because teams show up to Tuscaloosa with Nick Saban and they're just like, oh my God, we got to play Bama. The game's too big. I'm going to piss down my leg, not an athlete, all that stuff, right? Like, and they've won games just based on that. Georgia was starting to get that allure about them, right? Like, there were teams that were like Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a perfect example. Like, no matter how good they were, they would always show up against Bama and they're just like, oh, the game's too big. Georgia was starting to get that allure. If they came out and just got absolutely blown out, that all goes away. But the fact that they were able to come back saves a little bit of face for them, and it's going to make teams still have to show up and be less confident, which is huge when it comes to the college game.
I think for me, the one thing that made me put Tennessee above Georgia is what is Georgia's offense primarily? It's the
Pass.
run. It's the run. Though, like, you would rather have Carson Beck beat you than to allow, ETN to run all over you. And looking at Tennessee, they have yet to let up 100 yards. I know they haven't played anybody besides Oklahoma, but even Oklahoma, they only put up like 86 yards of rushing offense against the Tennessee defense. So my thing is, if you can try to make Carson Beck be the one person who beats you, I would take Nico. I'm not going to try to attempt to say his last name, but I'm going to take Nico to win that game over Carson Beck. And so that's kind of why I put, Tennessee above Georgia's, because Carson Beck's not who, Mel Kiper's going to make him to be next April. But, that's just the way that this game works, and he's probably going to end up going in the first round.
Yeah, the worst thing that happened in that game is I think Carson Beck got absolutely exposed as he looked terrible read quarterback. He either has predicated who he's throwing the ball to prior to the snap, or he makes one read and then goes away from it. Like,
even in the game,
he did the same thing in the second half. He just had one-on-one coverage.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't doing anything different. It was exactly those guys were just catching the ball and he was getting lucky, or there was a busted coverage and he had a dude wide open. Like, he wasn't making reads at all.
Correct. And they were saying, like, he's watching them the whole entire time and then he throws a pick. You want to know why he throws a pick? Well, you're not looking anywhere else, dog.
Exactly.
Number 3. Who do you guys have?
Tennessee.
I have Georgia.
See? Georgia. This is the surprise. Bam. Here's why. So this is exactly what Maul talked about with Georgia. This is me for Bama. Am I glad the game that worked out the way it did? For my life expectancy? No. But for like the standpoint of, and me and my dad, we said this after the game and we both had the same conclusion. It's all about how does a coaching staff take. If it was Saban, like, I already know the direction that they're going to go and Bama will be dominant for the rest of the year. How this coaching staff handles it, I don't know. And that will be the interesting part. They play Vanderbilt this weekend. Huge trap game. Like, Vanderbilt hasn't been as bad, but it's one of those games that, like, for me, I sit back and I'm like, look, we should have beat these guys 80-0. You guys took your foot off the brakes. And it wasn't just offense. It was a lot of play calling, in my opinion, that, like, clearly they got up, they got overconfident, and they were snapping the ball with like 20 seconds to go on the play clock. There was a lot of coaching things that they did during that game that I look back and I'm glad that they did it, because it's a huge learning moment for Bama. And they should throttle some teams going out, but they still have Bama still has a tough schedule. They have to go to Tennessee, which that game Tennessee should be undefeated. Going there will be huge. Like, I guarantee you, it's just like 2 years ago. That will be the ABC 7 p.m. game. Tennessee at night. It will be rocking. That will be a great college football game. They got to play Mizzou, LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn. Like, they still have tough games. Bama does. The second half worries me, mainly from a coaching standpoint, because I really do believe that coaches really don't change their philosophies. They just sort of chalk it up and go, oh, well, if that guy had covered the guy better, we wouldn't have been in that position. And it's like, no, the fact that you rushed 8 when you're up by 18, I sit back and I go, what are you doing? Like, make them earn every single yard. Like, hitting just like they did. They had to get it from 18 to where they got was 2 huge bombs down the field. One that ended at the 1-yard line and one that they took the lead. Very fortunate, in my opinion. And my dad said that I was not alive to watch him, but my dad said that number 2, the 17-year-old Ryan Williams, reminds him of Rocket Ishmael. Because he's like, when that dude was a freshman, he was like, everyone was like, who is that kid? Like, immediate turning heads. And what makes Ryan Williams special on that team, he makes everyone around him better, because now that dude's going to draw coverage. Like, everyone else is going to get one-on-one matchups at Bama, because the teams are going to be like, I can't let the 17-year-old kid keep beating us for no good reason. So Bama's at 3 for me, just because if they had won 80-0, yeah, that I'd put them at number 1. But they showed some weaknesses that I sit back and I feel like Maul. I don't feel like that was a true Bama I saw in the first half. I think I saw a little bit more of it in the second half, and that's what worries me, especially against my number 2, the only 2 teams above them in no particular order of Texas and Tennessee. That's where I'm at with Bama. Who you guys got at 3?
Mine was Tennessee.
Yeah, mine's Georgia at 3.
Oh, that's right. My bad. Number 2.
I have Bama, and I know the win over Georgia is a big win, so that's why I don't have a problem with the AP poll ranking them number 1. But again, when I look at like who we're playing the game against, these 2 guys, obviously Texas is the other team and they're my number 1, spoiler alert. But the Bama that played the second half, I think is a truer team of what Bama is. Now, if Bama can come out and play like the first half Bama, they're beating everybody 3 times to Sunday, but like that I didn't think was the true Bama. And I think just on a general playing a full game, Texas is a better team than Bama. But, Bama got the win over Georgia, so I got Bama at 2, and then I got Texas at 1.
Yeah, and I think that's really going to answer.
Does the Texas fan put Texas at 1?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as Maul. Really, the biggest thing, the question marks of allowing Georgia back into that game. Really, even at home, in Tuscaloosa, allowing for them to have a chance to win the game essentially down the stretch was concerning. But also, here in a couple of weeks, we're going to get the question answered, when the Bulldogs go to Texas. And, they're, again, going to be playing on the road in an opposing stadium. And, I think there's still some question marks. There's going to be a little bit of drama unfolding when Quinn Ewers comes back and is able to play about, is he going to be missing rhythms, and that pressure gets to him. Maybe there's some production drop off. There's going to be some questions to be had when Quinn Ewers is healthy again. That I think Sarkisian's going to have to deal with, and it might come down to them Texas taking a loss, halfway through the season.
I've got Tennessee at 2 and Texas at 1. If you want to jump ahead to next week, I'm cool with it, because I feel the same with. I think that's the biggest question I have. Like Tennessee, it's just, in my opinion, if we get down to it and they're both undefeated and Tennessee keeps looking like they're looking, I'm going to take Tennessee against Bama at Neyland on the 3rd Saturday of October.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest question for Texas is exactly what you brought up, which is when Ewers comes back, who plays? I think that both quarterbacks look really good. However, I would argue that against Georgia, I think Ewers is the better choice just because as a, really his first time playing, Kirby's going to show him some different things that could easily get them down early if he just makes some mistakes. Now, Arch could come out and just light it up, but Arch has thrown some interceptions.
Yep.
That will be the big test. It's a huge choice for Sarkisian because when he's healthy, it's the whole team. You got to take a read on the team. Who do they want playing? That's a big decision that when that comes down to, that will decide Texas's season in that moment.
No doubt.
I think the fans are, you said the team, but the fans as well. Like the fans already have proven that they love Arch and rightfully so. But like Pop said, like if Quinn comes back and is just like a little off, especially against like better teams, and the fans start chanting for Arch because, people are that dumb, like that could rattle somebody. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about that.
And if he starts Ewers and Ewers struggles, the second he pulls that trigger and puts Arch back in, it's done.
Yeah,
like
there's no
because
more.
then you can't flip it back and forth anymore. Now Arch is the starter, and then you have to ride or die with Arch because if Arch starts to struggle, you can't just be like, okay, we're gonna go back to Ewers. Like it's set in stone.
And
And
that's
that to me,
I got that Dr. Pepper money.
Well,
See ya.
Yeah. But see, that's the funny thing about it though too, is that now you're messing with Quinn's draft stock. He started the season as a Heisman favorite. He's playing like one, and then now all of a sudden Arch is in the Heisman conversation. It's just like, wait a second, we've got these two dudes here that are essentially the same guy. And here's the thing: they've got Oklahoma, then they've got Georgia in the next 2 weeks after this bye week. I mean, dude, I would hate to be Sarkisian right now.
Side note, Arch being in the Heisman, like running,
It's foolish.
It destroys the Heisman like credibility.
Yeah.
Like it just does.
Well, because he played tune-up games. Let's be honest. He played tune-up games.
Am I shocked?
And he didn't play all the games.
Are you shocked though? I mean,
no.
It's always just like, who's the quarterback for the best team? Let's put him in the Heisman running. That's always that's what it's been at least the last like 10 years. It's a joke.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if we're all on the same thinking, the same logic. Who right now is your guys' Heisman favorite? Like if you had to cast a vote, who are you voting for Heisman?
Before this last week, I would have said Cam Ward. I'm with everybody else. Like at halftime, dude, I was like, holy smokes, Jalen Milroe's about to win himself the Heisman just based on this game alone. Like that was like a Joe Burrow almost type moment when, Joe Burrow, he had a great year, but that game against Bama won him the Heisman. Like anybody who had any doubts after watching that Bama game was just like, okay, yeah, Joe Burrow's the Heisman. But that was the type of game that Jalen Milroe had. So I think it's come a lot closer. I still think Cam Ward has the edge. You put me on the spot here, so I don't have a whole lot of data to back up any other players. But
I've got one other person that I would vote for right now. Travis Hunter.
It's mine.
Like he's still playing both sides of the ball, putting up 100 yards and picking off quarterbacks. Like he
absolutely fair point.
Yeah, he's not getting the love because they're 4-1, but they've essentially
because he's not a quarterback.
Yeah, he's not a quarterback.
Yeah,
but you can't. Last year, to me, I know Jaden Daniels put up good numbers. Last year, Travis Hunter was the Heisman winner.
Yeah, until he got hurt.
Until he got hurt. Like
yeah.
And he's doing it this year. Like he's playing 200 snaps, like in a game. Like he's unreal. My only argument with Milroe's not the best player on the team. 17-year-old kid is. Like that kid's ridiculous. That catch versus Georgia. I saw this TikTok that made me laugh so hard. It was this guy. He's like, "Yo, I finally reached this. We've all reached this age." He's like, I've finally reached that age where guys in college are now younger than me. He goes, this kid's 17 years old. He goes, watch this. He catches it and he catches it and is spinning as he catches it. And he's like, my spine would have came out of my mouth, but I don't end it. And he goes, now this kid has the audacity to look at all of us old people and take off running. And he's got 2 5-stars running after him. He goes, and he's 17 years old. And he goes, I'm going to step and do a spin move and make these two other dudes kiss themselves. And then I'm going to run in the end zone. And 5 yards from the end zone, I'm so confident that I'm going to yank my mouthpiece out because I know that I've scored. I don't need this mouthpiece anymore. He goes, I have never felt older in my entire life watching that 17-year-old kid score, which that, for me, that's where I sit back and I loved what Milroe did, but if he didn't have Ryan Williams on the outside, they don't win that game.
Mhm.
Like that kid's the playmaker. That's the best player on the team. I sit back and I look at Travis Hunter and I'm like, that's the best player on the team. Like if Colorado doesn't have him, they ain't winning games. Like he locks down one side of the field when he's a corner, and he's their most dynamic wide receiver. And I can only imagine that if he only played wide receiver, how much like more stamina he'd have through the game. The fact that he's able to do what he does during the game, wild, in my opinion. But sorry, I had to go on a rant because Arch Manning's getting Heisman votes. It's like Ohio State getting #1 votes. Kick rocks. Not until he comes out and beats Georgia and wins the SEC undefeated, then I can sit back and go, okay, maybe I'll throw some votes Arch's way. But outside of that wraps up our college week. Y'all got anything else?
No, I'm good.
Cool. Well, until next time, Football Talk.